Hello and welcome. I'm Kate.
And I'm Emily, and this is Beyond the Neurotype,
A podcast that explores what it's like to be human affirming, regardless of labels, considerate of every person's individual needs, and allowing us to, ideally, understand what is behind every individual's actions, choices, and needs.
We do this with curiosity and love as we explore these individual and unique experiences that are rich with challenges, growth, and grace.
I'm Kate, a mental health social worker and synergetic play therapist. I'm the co-founder of the Village Therapy Hub. I'm a mum to 2 adolescents, and I love understanding and exploring what is happening beneath the surface for children and adults, and what behaviours are communicating to us. But let me keep it real. Much like yours, my life is a roller coaster. So I also understand the complexities of being a carer, the challenges of the day-to-day, and I won't pretend it's all enjoyable.
I'm Emily, a neurodivergent mum to a beautiful autistic girl and wife to a wonderful autistic man. I'm passionate about celebrating neurodiversity and creating a community where people are seen, held, and loved for who they truly are. It is my hope that as you listen to the stories of our beautiful guests, you feel inspired, validated, and supported in your journey.
This podcast is recorded on the land of the Dja Dja Wurrung people. We offer our heartfelt gratitude to the traditional custodians and elders, past, present, and emerging, for continued opportunities to learn, reflect, and grow.
Hello, Kate.
Hello, Em. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. Today we're having a chat about last week's episode with our beautiful guest Penny. And
what a good one.
Such a good one. And we come back to education a lot when on this podcast, and I felt like there was just so much goodness out of that episode from Penny. I'm really excited to chat about a few things that she talked about. Mostly, I loved how she talked about prioritizing connection and relationships in the classroom. And yeah, we talked a lot about post-COVID and brain sense of safety. There's a lot jam-packed in there.
There was, yes. There was. When I listened back to it before recording this, I was like, wow, we really covered some ground and really brought in some big concepts and ideas that, it was a lot for one episode.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to get her back.
Yeah. And I think you're right. That connection piece is so big, like it's so important. And yes, we were talking to to Penny specifically around the school experience. But I've also found in my parenting journey that connection piece is so important. And I just think connection might be the glue that holds everything together in all parts of our lives.
I agree. And when we were going through a tricky time with my daughter, tricky's probably underplaying it, but and your advice to me at the time was just focus on the connection. And so I have taken that advice, and prioritizing that connection has been where things have been able to move in a more positive trajectory, I feel. I think that just, yeah, we probably underestimate just how important that connection is, and then reestablishing that safety, and then being able to work through other issues. I feel like if that connection piece comes first, that's the kind of the key.
Yeah. And I think I'm not even sure whether it's that we underestimate the importance of connection or whether all the other expectations and pressures and shoulds cause us to put it second to
Mm,
getting whatever it is we're trying to get done. Like you're trying to get out the door. And so your focus is on getting out the door, and you lose sight then of what is happening for the child who's not able to get out the door for whatever reason. And we turn into this space of like, come on, hurry up, we've got to do this. And we start thinking about where we're trying to get to and who we're going to be late for, or, what they're going to think of that. And, like, it's layered,
mm.
this objective that we run with, but it does stop us from seeing the person in front of us and seeing what they're dealing with.
And it's complicated too. I only have one child, so I can't imagine if you've got two children that have competing needs and both need your constant attention and, that constant connection, like how hard that is to then offer that and co-regulate two different children in different places at the same time, as well as, keep yourself sane and not drop any of the balls. And I imagine in a classroom environment that would be extremely difficult with this increase of kids with diagnoses or trauma or kind of issues to be mindful of, to then, yeah, have to do that with 25, 30 kids.
Yeah, and not only that, but that's 25 nervous systems that are all talking to each other and
Mm,
all having their own experiences and all managing their own sensory input. And so there's a lot happening energetically in those spaces as well, and in households.
mm,
Anywhere where you've got multiple people, you've got multiple nervous systems, and it is a lot. Yeah, and absolutely, classrooms are a really complex environment
mm.
with a lot of pressures and expectations as well as needs.
Yeah, when I think back about my most positive kind of years in school or times where, yeah, you do think about the connection with the teacher that you had. Like there's one teacher, Mrs. Bear, her name was, just that beautiful connection that she seemingly made for all of us. And yeah, I just adored her, and that made, everything else kind of that much easier as a kid that was fairly up and down with how I travelled at school. Yeah. And
Yeah, I kept thinking when I was into Penny speak about the concept of unconditional positive regard,
mm,
of finding something that we can connect with everyone we come into contact with in order to build relationship. And it
mm,
actually really got me thinking about a story that I used to use when I was doing trainings with teachers. So I had this experience, and the teacher that this relates to knows that I use this example. It was really powerful for both of us when it came about. But I was working in a primary school at the time, a really complex primary school with um, really low socioeconomic and really high immigration population. So it was a real mix of kids from really poor families and also kids that had just arrived, newly arrived from refugee camps and as asylum seekers. And I was working with this teacher, and she had these two children in her classroom, and both of them were behaving in ways that she found really, really difficult. Both of them had really complex needs and presented them in ways that really affected the classroom and she found really difficult. And we were talking about those two children. And one of them, who came from a poorer family, who had significant traumas in their life through poverty and neglect, the teacher could relate to that child's existence. So she could see that child's struggles when they arrive in the morning, and she could know, well, this child hasn't had breakfast yet today, so I'm going to make sure that child gets some breakfast. And then they've potentially witnessed some form of abuse last night, so I'm going to be really mindful of the fact that they might be a bit fragile. And because the teacher could know this and keep this in mind, she was able to, I guess, go gently with this child and give them a little extra space and kind of back off when things started to feel really tricky and not push really hard to get the work done. And it was really interesting how that then formed connection and they were able to find ways to support this child. And then they had another child in the classroom who was from a refugee background. And this child was a newly arrived um, family, had come with a newly arrived family. They had lived in a refugee camp. And this child actually displayed really similar behaviours to the other. But because the teacher couldn't imagine what that experience had been like, she just had no reference for it. Imagined that they were, lucky to be here, pretty grateful that they'd made it to Australia and they were getting on with things, as a lot of refugee families do. So the family presented as if they were incredibly grateful, happy to be here, no problems at all. And so when this child was coming in and showing these really complex behaviors and challenging her in her teaching, she just couldn't see in the same way that actually these children had very similar experiences and had similar things happen to them that had caused them to find that classroom really disruptive. And when we were able to break down and actually think about the second child's experiences of living in a refugee camp and of leaving their home country to move to another one and the complexity for their family around all of those challenges, the teacher started to be able to get really curious about, oh my gosh, I wonder what it's like for this child to come in here every day and still be learning the language and trying to figure out social and cultural differences and going home every night to parents that are stressed trying to make things work in a new country and all the layers to that. And once the teacher could get some curiosity around that and start to think about that child's experience, everything changed in their relationship. And it became the same as with the first child, that the teacher could know that, oh, perhaps, something tricky might have happened on the way here this morning, or things might have been a bit complicated last night, and perhaps, all of bits. And it absolutely changed the way that teacher was able to connect with both of those children. And what that just came back to is this attempt at positive regard, at finding things and ways to understand the people that we come into contact with.
Yeah, it's such a good example of, yeah, often we see a child exhibiting behaviours and it's kind of can very quickly become a problem child, and then we kind of forget to look for the context and what's
Yeah.
actually going on behind it. And behavior is communication. And, if we know first up, then yeah, you can give a lot more grace, but maybe these behaviors are kind of need to be treated as like a warning sign or what have you, that there's actually something bigger going on there rather than managing behavior.
Yeah. And it's so layered because as parents, we also don't want our children to be labeled as the tricky one or the challenging one. And we don't want that story to follow them through their lives. So we can downplay in important conversations with people that can be making things different for our children. We can downplay how much it's impacting them because we don't want everyone to think it's impacting them, but we also want support to change it. So it becomes really complex really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely can relate to that in the early days and before my daughter was diagnosed, like, yeah, equally trying to like get support, but also try and downplay, yeah, the effect that certain things in our life had had. And now that I know she's autistic and feels things in a much deeper way, and change is really triggering for her, it makes sense. But yeah, it's kind of almost um, that seesaw of wanting support and wanting help, but because it's really confronting as a parent to think, oh gosh, things I've done or that I've allowed to happen in my child's life have had a negative impact on them, and they're now behaving in this way, and that's my fault.
Mm. Yeah, and we want to kind of find then the similarities in other people's kids so that we're not the only one that's confronted with, this particular challenge. And I
Mm,
guess I hear that there's a really, it's really tricky when people talk about when you're the safe place and a safe person, and that's why your child's going to be acting up in that place. And so, yes, they come home and they're really overwhelmed, and so they lash out at home. And absolutely, it's true, but it's as challenging as being told you have to put your own oxygen mask on first to hear, because it feels helpless. Like, what do I do with this? And so what I do with it is try and find, oh, but other kids must do this too. Or so yours is doing that and that is worse than mine. Or like we try and help ourselves feel better in any way that we can.
mm,
And
yeah.
I'm thinking about how, like, I was sitting in a meeting recently at a school with a child who presents fairly well at school, but has a lot of struggles. And the meeting was consisting of a lot of, well, yes, of course they struggle at home. That's where they feel safest. And oh, yes, it must be really hard, but yes, parents, but parents, wow, you're doing such an amazing job. Lots of, trying to help the parents feel like they're doing everything right while they're absolutely feeling like they're just so struggling and don't know what to do. And then they started talking about how they need to support their child to get essentially dressed and do everything to get ready to get to school in the morning. And then the parents finished that description off with, oh, but I'm sure lots of kids need help getting dressed in the morning, don't they? And you could just feel how badly those parents needed that to be true. They needed someone else in the room to say, oh, yeah, oh, of course, so many kids need to be physically dressed by their parents every morning in order to get them to school. And the reality is, if that is true, then we desperately need to be doing something differently at school. Because if the child's needing support to get dressed to get there, there is something really going on for that child. But we do this piece where we're like, oh, yeah, yeah, of course, you're not alone in that. Of course, other kids need that too. And then the parents get to feel like, okay, that's not something I have to feel like really guilty about.
Mm,
And they shouldn't feel guilty about the fact that they're supporting their child in any way that they can to get them to where they need to be anyway. I think getting your child dressed in the morning, if your child cannot do that for themselves, is absolutely crucial. Like if you have a child that cannot get themselves dressed to go to school, then forcing them to get themselves dressed is not how I would suggest handling that. I would absolutely be getting them dressed. But do we need the piece then of like, but you have permission to do that because other people are doing that too? Or could we just do that? You have permission to do that because that's exactly what your child needs.
I think I really struggled with the idea, and I suppose too because I had an only child, and the year that she started school, the previous year, her kinder year, she had been very unwell and she had pneumonia 3 times and was in and out of hospital a lot. And there was definitely this sense that I picked up from the school and a few little comments that it was almost a bit of coddling because she was my only child, um and so I think too it's kind of like this feeling like this justification's needed and making sure that you're not doing too much. I really got the sense in our first year of school that they really wanted me to not do too much for her, and she should be carrying her own bag. Like her bag's more than half the height of her, but like you barely see her legs underneath it. But all of this kind of, yeah, really pushing this kind of independence. And so when you're still needing to do things for your child, and the prep, the wheels fell off big time our first term of prep. Yeah, it's kind of this real dance that you're doing. Like, am I doing too much? Am I doing the wrong thing? Am I? Yeah.
Yeah, it is a dance, a constant debate with yourself, a constant debate with society, and then that turns into a constant debate with your child
Mm,
because there's so many pieces that are informing every decision you make.
mm,
Because we don't live in this little bubble where it's just us and our kid and we can just figure out whatever we need to and give them whatever we need to. And people that have worked really hard to create bubbles like that, it's an absolute credit to them to be able to create an environment where, yes, my child is at the forefront and what they need is what I'm going to do and be in. And for a lot of people, they can't create that. And so they're dealing with all the other pieces as well.
mm,
And it's really complex. And this
mm,
idea of being able to, coming back to Penny's piece about offering literacy that is created in a way that is around every individual child and how they receive it and how they work with it. Like it's so um, encouraging to know that those programs that research is being done, that the way we deliver literacy now in early years is changing, that there are things that are happening in that space, because we talk about how slow the Department of Education can be to make changes and how they can often be behind where research and science is. So it was really encouraging to hear from Penny that there's some really solid new foundational literacy pieces being used, because it's really true that if our children miss some of that really early stuff, it's really hard for them to come back and make gains.
mm,
And we do see a lot of disengagement in later years for exactly that reason.
And just, yeah, we're talking about like the school to prison pipeline, or mental health and things like that. You can see how, yeah, if a child isn't supported and just things get progressively worse and worse and worse every year, then they're disengaged, and then they're hanging out with other kids that are disengaged, and they might be disengaged because there's more going on. And then, it's just flows on from there.
And I do think, because I've got to say, like you know, school to prison pipeline, as someone whose child is disengaged in secondary school, and like that's a really confronting thing to hear.
Mm. Yeah,
That, oh my God, my kids aren't managing any education. So what does that mean? And am I
yeah,
actually just letting this happen? I think the antidote, though, is connection.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
people would say, oh, well, if you homeschool your kids, then they're at greater risk of that prison pipeline because you're not a teacher. You don't know how to teach them. I truly believe the antidote is connection.
I agree. Yeah, and definitely that's not to say all kids that are disengaged with school are on a pipeline to prison.
Well, it's the
It
kids that are
doesn't help.
disengaged and then have no one in their life that sees them
Mm,
that are at risk. It's the children that just miss anyone noticing them. It's the kids that get painted really early on in their lives as problems
Mm.
and
It,
challenging.
it
And
becomes
then,
your identity. Like if you're the
yeah,
problem kid, then you've got to almost live up to it. And so anything that goes wrong is then kind of pinned on you, or you're picked up so much quicker than everyone else if you're seen to be stepping out of line once you kind of got that label. And a teacher gets you, and they're aware of your reputation, and they're your new teacher for the year. So then you're on that back foot of the connection because your teacher's like, right, got to look out for this kid. Um, their trouble. And then in the playground, everyone's just kind of keeping an eye. It's like, well, what else can he do but live up to it?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. What you expect from me is what I will give you because I don't want to let anybody down.
Yeah. And the injustice, I suppose, of from knowing some of these kids that are, a bit more reactive or what have you, but just the injustice when someone's needled them or bullied them or, driven them to this explosion point, and then they've reacted, and then they're the ones that get in trouble all the time. And I can see, yeah, where that disengagement, then why would you want to be there?
Yeah.
No one sees any good in you.
Mm. And it can just take one person seeing the good in you, one person believing in you, one person who steps back from the purpose of what you're there for and instead connects with what makes a difference for you, what helps you feel good in this world. Because if you're not getting that anywhere else and you're still showing up to school every day,
Mm.
then, we all need to connect.
Mm.
And that is why some of these kids who have really challenging lives and experiences and turn up to school and are really challenging, they come every day because they're looking for connection.
Mm. Yeah, and school may still be their safe place.
Yeah. So the power of a teacher being able to, or anyone in that school being able to
Mm.
see them for who they are and not the story that they come with.
Mm.
Pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And while we're talking, I'm like running. I've got like images of kids I've known. These kids coming into my head, like it's like ghosts of stories past, and it's really interesting how they're all just like coming and flashing in front of me. And they all have the same thing in common, which is that they are incredibly gentle souls in an incredibly tough exterior because they have had to harden their shell to survive the world.
Mm.
And that is, kids do that in many, many ways. They harden up to be able to survive what they've got going on. And that happens in various levels. Like, obviously the stories that I'm having flash into my head, that children that are coming back in my head right now to visit me are pretty extreme examples of terrible circumstances in their lives. But children experience the world according to their own experience. It's all relative. Whatever's happening in my life is my biggest challenge and my biggest hurdle to overcome. And so I will turn up with that. And that is the case for every child and human that we come into contact with. So you may have a child that you're in contact with who it feels like their story is not that difficult, that, there's no real reason for them to, they've got a good loving home and their parents both work and they've got blah, 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 lovely family, yet the child comes with these real challenges. And so because we see it as there's no reason for this. We can't actually see what the behavior is trying to communicate because we have a story of, well, there's nothing really wrong here. This kid just needs to learn some resilience, learn to be able to manage things better. They, need some lessons of hardship, to overcome, blah, 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 the things that we say as adults. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Yeah. And you just never know.
You never know.
I had a lot going on at home as a particularly teenager, but even as a looking at primary school that people would never have guessed. And yeah, can see how it really did affect my engagement and the way I felt about myself. And yeah, I really think it's so important to be just meeting these kids where they're at, taking their behaviors, communication, and it's not easy at all. Like for the I really feel for the teachers because we talk about all this sensory input. Like the teachers are in that environment too. They're in a classroom with 25, 30 kids that, like, I'm quite sensitive to noise and I live in quite a quiet house. Like my husband's quiet, my child's pretty quiet. And so for me, when I'm around loud kids, it's really triggering for me. Much as I love these kids and everything, but yeah, it's just like a bit of a shock to my system because I'm just not used to this noise. And, when the behaviors can be triggering or um, really frustrating, like the teacher being able to be regulated so that then they can co-regulate with these children. Um, it's a big ask. It feels like a really big ask. Mm.
So let's actually think about that because I talk about this with parents a lot and don't often get the opportunity to talk about it with teachers. But the reality is that we cannot regulate in like big pieces. When we're in it, when we're doing it, when we're in the day and there's lots happening and we're coming across dysregulation all the time, we are not going to go plug ourselves into a wall, fill our battery back up and be good to go again until our battery runs out. Like that's not how we work. We have this ebb and flow of, well, Penny referenced the spoons theory in her podcast, I think very briefly. But the spoons theory, which would suggest that we all have so many spoons available to us, and those spoons represent energy, and that different parts in our day will remove spoons from us, and other things will give us back spoons. And so spoon theory is quite a popular way to talk about how much energy we have available to us and how depleted we might feel at any one time. But something that I talk a lot about is the fact that we have to actually use micro moments of energy restoration because we don't often get big moments. Like self-care is a great concept. It's a great theory, but it's often something that feels out of reach to people because they think about self-care as being going and getting a massage, going out with friends to dinner for a couple of hours, going and having a bath. And some of these things are not in people's capacity because they don't have the time, the money, the resources to be able to do those things. So it becomes about micro moments of self-care. And that looks like accessing things that actually have been proven to activate our vagus nerve and actually fill us up and help us to connect with our body. And so it does mean things like eating crunchy foods, drinking through straws, and drinking something that's really thick through a straw can be really great, like making a smoothie or something like that and drinking it through a straw is actually really great. Jaw activation is really great for our vagus nerve. Cold So if you've got a kid that eats ice or like crunches on icy poles, I've got one of those. That is a regulation strategy. We can use that for ourselves as too. Eating crunchy cold things is actually really great for us. Drinking a warm drink and actually noticing the sensation of doing that. And then it's little things like if we're going to eat something, for maybe we don't get to stop and eat, but maybe we can have just 2 bites of that food where we actually notice the taste and actually notice the texture of the food and actually have a moment to think about the fact that we are actually eating something. Because how often do we rush through our day just like chugging some water, eating some food, like running, and all of that keeps us really dysregulated. So as parents, it looks like those tiny little moments in the day. And as teachers, it looks like those tiny little moments as well. You know, when I'm at work, I have to really consciously ensure that between my clients, I have tiny little moments of regulation. And one of my favorite go-tos is cold grapes because they're crunchy, they're sweet, and they're cold. Or like rice crackers or something crunchy like that. A lot of people, when I have this conversation with them as parents, will say, oh, that's why my kid's always eating chips, or that's why my kid's always eating ice, or that's why, because kids are fantastic at doing this for themselves, and it's often us that get in their way. One of my favorite things as a hack as a parent was to always put the veggies on the plate raw. So I never ever cooked like every night at dinner, no matter what we were eating, and it might have been nuggets and chips. I would cut up some carrot and put some frozen peas on my kids' plate. And they loved that. And it was this moment of like crunching something, eating something cold. And it was really regulating at a time when like dinner time's often really, really difficult for families. And it was a way for us to the point where like one time I had someone over for dinner. God knows why. I don't have people over for dinner. And I'd gone to like an effort, like I cooked a roast, also weird. I don't cook roast. So I'd obviously made a lot of I'd obviously gone to a lot of effort with this person. Anyway, didn't even occur to me to cook the vegetables because it's been years since I've cooked a vegetable. And so we sat down with this like hot roast dinner and they went to pick up their carrot raw. And they're like, oh, like trying to pretend that hasn't just happened. And I went, oh, that's right. We eat raw veggies in this house. And that was
Oh, that's
the
the
first
best.
time I realized that was kind of weird.
I like my peas frozen. Oh, that's unusual. Oh, I'll keep that in mind if I'm ever invited to
Yeah.
dinner.
If you ever come for dinner. Yes. So it's like, you know, does that, I don't know, as someone that's hearing me say all of this, does that make sense? The
Yeah.
idea, tiny, tiny little bits.
And the idea is in stimulating the vagus nerve is to kick the parasympathetic nervous system back in, your rest and digest state, and come out of your sympathetic or your fight or flight state. And so, like, often we can do that by like using the mouth. Is that?
Mouth's a really good one for activating that because it sits right at the branch, like our jaw sits right at the branch of the vagus nerve. Thank you for bringing in the science too. I'm really good at dropping the reason why we do things. Forge ahead with what we should do. Don't tell people why. So the jaw can be really, really good, which is why a lot of that is kind of food based. But it's also why if you put, you know, splash cold water on your face, pressure on our head, you know, pressing down on our head can be really, really good. And anything that connects us to our body, so reminds our brain that our body actually exists, because when we're in a heightened space, our brain disconnects from our body, and so we forget that our body's there and needs paying attention to. So even just things like squeezing your arms, squeezing your legs, rubbing on them, noticing your feet touching the floor, wriggling your toes in your shoes, all of those things really help us to reconnect. And they can be things that we do like all the time. You can be standing at the front of a classroom delivering some information about what we're going to learn next and wiggling your toes in your shoes. You can be, holding your arms and giving them a squeeze while talking to someone about something. I did this really interesting experiment once. I was at a primary school and I was there to help with the prep transitions. So these were kids that were transitioning into prep the following year. And I'd been doing a lot of this stuff with the prep teachers, talking to them about the power of all of this. And so anyway, I happened to be there for a break time. It was probably this group's first ever experience of the playground. So there's, you can imagine a lot going on, these kids that have never been to school before, and suddenly they're in a playground experience. And so they're all kind of, running around and chaotic and all the bits. And I thought, I'm just going to see what happens. And I just stood in the yard. I'm a weirdo, by the way. Stood in the yard and I started pressing on my head because I was just like, I just feel like I'm really starting to move out of myself. There's a lot happening here. Kids running around everywhere. This is a bit crazy. So I'm going to do it for myself and I'm just going to see if it has any impact. And so I started like just pressing on my head, standing in this yard. And then a couple of kids noticed me and just stopped and did the same thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, they needed it too. And they just needed this like mirror to remind them that they needed it. Because I guarantee if someone else in that yard at that point had have done it, I would have seen them and gone, oh my gosh, I want to do that too. And so the teachers, it was so interesting because I've been talking to them about it. A couple of them came up to me and were like, are you doing that head thing? And I was like, yeah, you want to join me? Because look at the kids. And so, the power of regulating ourselves, because what it offers is a mirror and a reminder. So the people around us will have this sense of like checking in with their own selves, or do I want to do that as well?
I think about with that our singing group that we're in, and when often we'll start off with some kind of muscle movement and stretches and things, and when you see someone like massaging their jaw or something, and then straight away you're like, oh yeah, like mine's really tight, I'm going to do that too. And singing, by the way, is another good vagus
Yes.
nerve. It might stimulate some sympathetic fight or flight responses in other people though, especially if it's me.
You could sing at home. You could sing at home if you don't want to be doing it in a group. You could sing at home. Music's fabulous. My kids always complain when I sing. I mean, they probably have reason to complain. I'm not that gifted, but they would complain when I'd sing. And I would always say to them, don't tell someone to stop singing. If someone is singing, it's because they really need to. Because humming's a really good one for our vagus nerve. So, even if you don't want to be singing something, just humming something is really powerful. Yes. And sometimes we need these reminders because it's, if a kid was humming in a classroom, they'd probably be told to stop. And actually, probably we all need to have a moment of humming.
Yeah,
instead, and maybe that's a reminder.
That's that child following their natural instincts to regulate.
Yeah.
And so then if we're stopping them from humming, and I can imagine if, a kid's humming, it will potentially set off other kids or, so what are we going to replace
it with? Of course it will,
with?
because of mirror neurons. And it's exactly what I just talked about. Like as soon as someone starts doing something that you actually need as well, you will do it because you go, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, classroom environment, kids start all humming.
Yeah. But I mean, for my childhood, she would find that really, it could just be directed at me, but, and I'm especially terrible, but, I'm not allowed to sing or hum or make noise like that. But yeah, I just think, well, instead of like, wait, stop humming, you're being disruptive or whatever. Yeah. What else can they be doing? Obviously, see that as a sign that they're needing some regulation, not they're misbehaving because they're making noise.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? That sometimes the redirection is needed
Mm,
because perhaps the way we're accessing what we need isn't going to work in the environment that we're in. But it's great to be able to find an alternative. I can really see you need to do that. Let's try it this way
mm,
is really powerful rather than stop that. Because it's true, there won't always be environments that it's perfect to do everything. But it explains, let me just name this, that the next time you see someone doing something, even if you're in the supermarket and you see someone using their body in a way and you suddenly have the urge to do that, and then you think, oh, I can't do that, they'll think I'm weird, I'm like copying them. There's really good information in that about the fact that what they're doing would feel really good in your nervous system too,
mm,
because that happens all the time, because mirror neurons are really powerful and we see people doing stuff and it alerts us to what we need. Like if I were to say right now, oh gosh, my bum feels really uncomfortable on this chair, everyone listening just thought about their bum
mm.
and what their bum feels like, because we just can't help but do that. It raises our awareness to ourselves, and we are um, so heightened to our own selves that we will always bring whatever anyone says or does back to our own self and have a moment of considering that.
Yeah, checking in. Yeah. Oh, I did it as soon as you said it, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm a bit uncomfortable.
And that's a really great way for building like interoception in kids as well, because when we talk about, oh, my tummy's grumbling, that must mean I'm hungry, or gosh, I've got this really weird pressure in the bottom of my belly, I need to go to the toilet. Because some kids really struggle with understanding interoception and what their body's telling them, because they've got so much going on that the information all becomes so overwhelming that they don't know what anything actually is. And we often talk about how do we like grow the skill of interoception, and a lot of that is through mirror neurons. It's through explaining how something feels for yourself in a really
Mm,
casual, like not in a, are you paying attention, I'm trying to teach you how you know you need to go to the toilet, like that. It's just about really casual ways. My mouth's dry, I'm going to grab some water, like, that kind of stuff.
yeah. And one thing you talked about in our episode with Penny is just the volume of sensory input that we receive, and a
Yes.
neurodivergent person is so how many times more than a neurotypical person in terms of all this information that your body's calibrating and calculating. And so, yeah, it can be a lot trickier than to hear the signals for what your body needs.
Well, that's exactly right, isn't it? Like if you've already dealing with all of that sensory data, 400 billion pieces, then you have to, yeah, how then are you supposed to determine between what sensory input from external and what's internal sensory input, and what my body's telling me it needs, as well as what my environment's telling me about? Like it's a lot of stuff.
One thing Penny mentioned was the universal design for learning too, which is something going back to our one of our earlier episodes with Shani from Neurodivergent Educator. Um, so I think it was good to hear that from someone else, another educator who sees the benefit of the universal design for learning. So, having different methods of assessment, different methods of being able to kind of deliver content, kids being able to access it, and offering accommodations to everybody and not just
Mm.
to the kids with a label.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it's got to be, I just still believe it's got to be easier on the teachers to offer accommodations to all than to try, like, if I'm not a teacher, so I can't even begin to understand what it feels like to be in a classroom day in, day out. But I know that for me, there would be no way I could remember the individual accommodations of everybody.
Mm.
The only way I could offer accommodations would be for them to be universal accommodations that anyone that needs to can connect with. it just must be so labor intensive, like the mental load of that. So the idea of being able to offer as much as possible, and also knowing that, yes, we might know that Joey over there needs regular brain breaks. But what we didn't know was that Sarah over there also does. And when we give them to everybody because we know that Joey definitely does, well, Sarah's needs get met too. And we didn't even know we were meeting Sarah's needs, but what a different experience she's having now that she's currently masking and not letting anyone know about. And that's massive because Sarah's experience as she gets older will be very different because she had her needs accounted for.
Yeah, and I just love that it accounts for enables kids with a label to grow and to extend and push themselves. And yeah, I've seen that with my daughter where I've, offered her accommodation often of not having to do something or that's particularly triggering. But then some days she really wants to push herself and do it to, I don't know, prove that she can, or maybe there's part of it that she really wants to experience. And so being able to, yeah, tap into and allow that bit of freedom of choice and to, I suppose with their fluctuating capacity, if there's a time where their capacity is a bit higher, to kind of, yeah, it's a good opportunity for them to gain some confidence in trying something new and achieving it. Whereas I think if it's, yeah, Johnny doesn't like XYZ, Johnny can't do this, so we're going to give this to Johnny instead. And it's just always that flat. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I talked in Penny's episode about my personal experience of connecting with Penny. So my daughter had been out of school for quite some time and had really lost her belief in her ability to learn. She wants to learn. She has some goals around what she wants to do in her future, but she had really lost her own confidence in the fact that she can learn anything.
Mm.
So we engaged with Penny, and Penny essentially did everything that she talked about, started off really slow, found something that they could have in common, worked really hard on the connection and on building the relationship, and then brought in learnings that my daughter was interested in and delivered them in a way that she was interested in. And then that built her confidence enough that she was able to start talking about her own needs around learning. So there was a very interesting moment where she and Penny had been working on something for quite a while, and Penny started talking about that they were, pretty much finished with this way of with this particular topic, and that soon they'd be able to move on to a new topic. And when that happened, my daughter got in the car, and for the first time ever, she said to me, "Mum, Penny thinks that I'm ready to move on to the next thing. But I know that I need to spend more time on this, that I've got it, but I haven't really got it. That now that she's taught it to me in that way, I actually want to learn it in a few other ways before we move on to the next topic. And I don't want her to move on until I'm ready, because I'm afraid then that I'll forget this and that I won't have got it in my brain as well as it could be. And so I don't want to move on yet. And could you tell her that? Because I'm not yet brave enough to be able to say that for myself." But the fact that she identified in that moment that she was capable of learning something, and that she had a sense of her own state of readiness, and that she didn't want to just, what was massive was that for the first time ever, she wasn't just going to follow the adult. And just because the adult had told her she was ready, she wasn't going to just move on to the next thing, which is what she'd done forever up until then, and never reached a stage of really knowing something in all of her educational experiences. And that was so massive. And so I was able to go to Penny and relay that. And Penny was, of course. And so then they got to have this really empowering conversation about how else could we learn this? And what are the other ways we could look at this? And they stayed on that same topic until she was ready to move on and able to say, now I'm ready.
And just that shows how important safety is, and
Yeah.
and providing an environment that it is safe. It's so hard, especially if you've had layered upon layered, events at school that have been challenging, to then add to self-advocate in a system that requires compliance, like, is huge. And so, yeah, it really shows the importance of the kids feeling safe and connected, um, to then, and it shows that they're not just looking for an easy out. Like,
Yeah.
she's wanting to learn, she's invested. And, I think sometimes it's like, oh, well, unless they're forced to do it, they're not going to want to learn. Like, we're talking about my daughter's passion project at the end of last year, and how as soon as they were able to pick their own topic and their own delivery and had that autonomy, they were so invested. And I see that now with my daughter, who's not attending school at all at the moment. And I've just kind of let her be for a while, and how she's naturally drawn to, she wants to learn, but it's, yeah, she's got the freedom now to do it in her own way, in her own time, and really deep dive into something, rather than being, okay, we're going to do maths for half an hour and then we're going to do, reading
Yeah.
for half an hour, that autonomy as well. And yeah, I don't know. I just, I love Penny's philosophy with teaching, and the way that she views it from a, I suppose from a perspective of trying to understand the psychology behind
Mm.
why. Um, yeah.
And I guess I was just thinking as well that it would have been really easy for me in that situation to say something like, oh, but Penny's the expert. She'll know when you're ready. We should trust her. If she thinks you're ready to move on, then maybe you are ready to move on. Maybe you're doing better than you think you are.
Mm,
Maybe you don't need as much as you think you do. Like there was so much opportunity in me for me to answer in any of those ways in that situation as well. So
mm,
what it also required from me was trust that she knows what she needs, and trust that connection connection to self, connection to Penny, connection to me trumps everything else. And
mm,
so, and any questioning of her telling me what she needed would impact the connection that we have. And
mm,
so every decision that's being made comes back to, how does this impact our connection?
mm. Yeah, I think it's just such food for thought when talking about, um, yeah, how schools need to probably change systemically to, when you're looking at what 38% of kids enrolled in school have chronic absenteeism. That was a stat that I heard recently. I can't remember if that's Victoria wide or nationally.
Right.
And the National Senate inquiry into school refusal in 2023 was 73% of children in that demographic of school refusers, in their word, or school can't, have a neurodevelopmental disability or neurodivergence, or, so it's big numbers,
Mm.
big numbers. And yeah, well, I think we just really have to look at where, in cases where it's going right, as a model for the future. And I just, yeah, um, love that we could kind of showcase what Penny does, and and what other educators do as well, and hope that it can drive some kind of force for what needs to come next.
Yeah, and offer up this curiosity and conversation about the potential to see people as they are and what they're telling us they need, and the benefit of responding to that. Yeah. Well, it's been a really big conversation again.
It was a big conversation today. I'm going to go away thinking about your frozen peas. That's
That's your highlight, that I feed guests frozen peas. Right. And then you'll probably do it tonight, and you'll find that it's a massive hit.
I have someone coming over for dinner, actually. So
good.
Maybe I'll try it. My daughter would love it, though.
I was going to say, at very minimum, if you have someone coming over for dinner and you have any expectation of your daughter coming anywhere near that, throw some frozen peas on there. It makes all the difference. Even if I had a thought about it in that particular instance, I still would have given my kids their frozen and raw vegetables. And I perhaps would have cooked them for my guest. But I would have definitely not changed that up for my kids. That was a big piece, yeah.
I'm going to give that a go tonight. I'll let you know how I go. Yeah, we'll throw some links down into how you can connect with Penny. Penny does, she works here in Bendigo where we're based, but she also does some online stuff as well. So we'll pop some links there if you want to connect with Penny. And yeah, we'll see you next week.
We're well into season 2 now. We've got some great episodes to come, so we can't wait to see you next week.
Lovely. We'll see you then.
For more information on today's conversation and guest, head to the links provided in the description. Please like and subscribe to keep up to date with more content, and it helps us out with the algorithm too. Beyond the Neurotype is not a licensed medical or mental health service, and any information or advice given is general in nature. Please seek professional help if anything mentioned in today's episode